Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now in our second season, and we're very excited to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. We look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's episode on extreme weather events. Wildfires, are they coming for all of us? Now, wildfire is a part of nature. It plays a key role in shaping ecosystems by serving as an agent of renewal and of change. But fire can, of course, be deadly, destroying homes. It destroys wildlife habitat and timber and pollutes the air with emissions that are extremely harmful to human health. Fire also releases toxic gases into the atmosphere, and its effect on the landscape can be long-lasting. Fire effects are influenced by forest conditions before the fire, as well as the management actions that are taken or not taken after the fire. However, widespread wildfires in summertime, and now even in springtime, are rapidly becoming our new normal in the American West. Along with the destruction and loss of forests caused by blazes, there are immediate and long-term environmental impacts that dramatically affect vital resources as well as vital aspects of our lives. Although fire can occur naturally from the sun or from a lightning strike, many wildfires are started by human carelessness and perhaps what I like to characterize as human environmental carelessness. It is estimated that wildfires make up to 10% of the annual global emissions of carbon dioxide, which causes our greenhouse gases, while significantly destroying forests, which are estimated to absorb approximately 30% of carbon dioxide emissions. So that can be a vicious circle. So there's a lot to unpack here and for us to try to understand exactly how and why the wildfires affect us in our everyday lives. And here today to start us out, to help us understand this more, is our California expert, Dr. Chris Dicus. Chris is a professor of wildland fire and fuels management at California Polytechnic University's Environmental Science Department. He is also current president of the Association of Fire Ecology, and he heads the Wildland Urban Interface Module of the California Fire Science Consortium. And he sits on the board of directors of the San Luis Obispo County Fire Safe Council, and he is a certified senior fire ecologist and also a California registered professional forester. Welcome, Chris. We are so glad you could join us today.
Well, I'm absolutely ecstatic to be here, and I'm so happy for the invitation. Thank you.
Chris, 2020 was a year of great loss and great destruction due to the wildfires in the northwest part of the United States. And everything that I've heard indicates that this has been the worst year in history for wildfires in the U.S. So can you start us out by explaining to us what sparks wildfires? How do they most often get started?
Well, there's two primary sources, certainly in the wildland areas, the Rocky Mountains and across the more mountainous areas of California. A lot of, you do have wildfires that start via lightning. Historically, the majority of fires, though, they start by people, by somehow. And we have had many fires, destructive fires over the last couple of years that have unfortunately been started by power lines during extreme wind events, that you have these sparks and 70-mile-an-hour winds pushing sparks. It can get big and ugly really, really quick. This year was a little bit different because we had this lightning bust that came through after we had experienced over a week of 110-degree temperatures. The relative humidities were incredibly low and dry. And then you had this lightning system came through, and it just poured lightning all over the state and simply overwhelmed the fire service, which on a normal day, they were incredibly effective at putting out these fires. But just too much all at once, and it just got away.
Even as experienced as they are, they can't put out millions of fires all at the same time, I don't imagine.
No, we're really, really good at what we call initial attack, where suppression, we're able to put out fires, over 90% of the fires within 10 acres. We're about that. Unfortunately, it's when it gets beyond that, the 10 acres, it's typically under extreme weather, and, it's just something you just get out of the way because it's not the firefighter's job to die. And so they're doing everything they can, putting their lives at risk, but they've got to be safe and as well as trying to be effective on the landscape.
Chris, I want to go back just really briefly. The lightning strikes in this last season met up with the extremely dry forest conditions. That's what sparked the recent fires. Is that correct?
Well, it's part of it, yeah. So it's really, really complicated when it came through in the sense that, yes, you did have all this lightning, which was coming down all at once. And it was hot and was dry, but also with just the unhealthy forest conditions that we had throughout California, it didn't take much to take a very small fire and make it into a big blaze. It just got beyond the capacity of the fire service.
But what I want to see, for example, had that same lightning strike came through, but maybe it was in wet conditions or something like that, then you would not have had a fire, correct?
Well, it's possible you get a fire, but it certainly was not going to get the extent that we see now, for sure.
Okay. I just wanted people to really understand the combustibility of those two things that happen. And, of course, the other thing, and you briefly mentioned it, but what we hear a lot about now, and we heard a lot about last fire season, was the electrical lines. Because I remember hearing a lot on the news, even prior to this latest outbreak, that PG&E was going to have to turn off electricity and things like that. So talk to us a little bit about how that sparks the fires.
Well, sure. Well, anytime you've got electrical sparks, that are coming down and hitting into some sort of receptive vegetation, it can very readily go. And typically you see where these ignitions start are under extreme wind events, which is something we saw during the fire that burned down the town of Paradise, which had, over 18,000 buildings were burned down during that fire. We have Southern California. We've seen the same thing, is under these extreme hot, dry winds, it just either knocking debris up into the power lines, or that you find that the power lines are actually kind of touching each other in some such situations. And again, it hits receptive fuel, and especially under those extreme winds, it's Katie bar the door and get out of the way, because you're not going to stop it until the wind changes.
To summarize, the environmental or natural factors involved are going to be extreme wind, dryness or drought, and lightning.
Those three certainly all came together, and the absence of water that we had, it was so dry. Not just the heat wave that we ended up having, but we've been in over 5 years of exceptional drought, one after another. Everything is just really dry and is ready to go at any moment.
So talk to us a little bit more about this year's fires, because I keep hearing that every year's worse. So compare and contrast this year's fires to last year's and the recent years. And then tell us, when is fire season? Or is there any such thing as a fire season, or is that changing or moving around, or what?
Well, when I first started fighting fire back in college a long time ago, you would typically think a fire season starts early June, and by the middle of September, you were done. But now we're finding that in many areas due to climate change, it's just you have a longer period of time in which these fuels are receptive. So it's getting earlier, where now fire crews are going on instead of June. We're looking at sometimes April, and they're told that you're not going to be stopping at the end of September. And commonly you find that many fire crews are going into October, November, as far as the federal firefighting service, that are seasonal in nature.
Oh, I see. It's interesting. We're going to go to break here shortly, Chris. And after we get back, I wanted to have you explain to our listeners, though, exactly how the climate change does impact wildfires in general, to actually connect the dots for them so they can see why it's important and why they need to care about this. So we'll be right back on the other side of the break. We've been with Dr. Chris Dicus from California Polytechnic. Thank you. We'll be right back. We want to give a shout-out now to our sponsors. That is EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting environmental awareness through expo, conferences, film festival, interactive experiences, and now EarthX streaming TV service. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods, Natural Grocers, Central Market, Sunflower Shops, and many other locations, as well as available online free for download at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other new sponsors are North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, as well as concierge services, classes, and we're told the best Christmas trees in Texas. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other new sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. Our show today is on extreme weather events. Wildfires, are they coming for us all? And we are back with Dr. Chris Dicus with California Polytechnic University. Again, thank you so much for being with us, Chris. Before the break, we were talking about the seasons, and you told us a lot about what actually sparks the wildfires. Give our listeners some statistics, because, again, it is the focus and the purpose of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio to create environmental empathy, to have people internalize and see for themselves why they must care about this stuff. So can you give us some statistics on the impact and the very widespread and devastating impact of California wildfires, like how many acres, what type of loss of life, dollar amount of health impact, and things of that nature?
Well, certainly we've seen almost an untenable situation in the last 5 years, especially in California, where, we're kind of a fire state, but some of the trends that we're seeing is just absolutely remarkable. For example, this year we burned over 3 million acres, which is just, it's an enormous amount of land. And we're finding that 70% of the largest and the most destructive wildfires in California's history has happened in the last 5 years. Now, back before even the Spanish explorers came here, there was a tremendous amount of indigenous burning, and there's some estimates by some of my colleagues that said in a traditional year in California, there might have been 4 million acres that have been burning via indigenous burning, letting just lightning strikes come forth. What's different this year is that you've got 3 million acres, but they're large areas. They're footprints. They're not the small little happy fires that perhaps the indigenous folks were igniting, pre-Columbian times. Now these large, high-severity fires that come through and cause all sorts of devastation, both to the environment and to the public as well.
Are there any statistics on health cost and loss of human life due to the wildfires?
Well, we've actually been somewhat fortunate, almost unexpectedly, given the fast nature of these fires, how few fatalities that we've had, given the exposure that we've got. But we had a fire that recently, last year, I believe, killed 85 people, which is just absolutely tragic. I was in Australia during Black Saturday, where 173 people died. And so even one life is too much. But we're finding that the loss of life, loss of property, and just exacerbated environmental consequences are going up, especially in the last 5 years. It's just been amazing seeing the trends.
I can imagine. Chris, can you talk to us a little bit, too, about how bad or what is the climate feedback from these wildfires? In other words, climate change is exacerbating the wildfires, but what are the wildfires doing to the climate and the rest of our environment?
Well, there certainly is a feedback loop. If you look at the models dealing with the emissions that come through what we have, is that wildfires certainly play an enormous role as far as emitting. This is particularly most damaging in some areas that don't traditionally burn, like we're seeing the peat forest of Indonesia burning. We're finding fires burning up in the boreal forest of northern Canada and Russia. And these are areas that just haven't traditionally burned. You just don't see that. And it's a tremendous source of carbon. And once they finally start igniting, there's just these large areas, and so much emissions are going forward via these wildfires. Now, this trend has kind of helped. It's been hindered a little bit, our ability to get out prescribed burns, because we're saying we can use fire, good fire, to take away the bad fire if we do it right. And so there are some that say, oh, you're doing prescribed burns, you're purposely putting out emissions. It's like, but no, these managers are putting fires so that you would have a smaller, lower intensity fire. So you have little pulses of smoke instead of having, like we saw this last year, a 1 million acre fire in California, which is just putting up unbelievable amounts of emissions into the landscape.
It's like when the doctor gives you a shot and says, this is going to hurt a little bit, but you're going to feel better.
Exactly, with the prescribed burning.
And I want to drill down just a little bit, so that I really want to make sure that our listeners understand the prescribed burning, its purpose, and what it does.
Sure. So most of the forests in the western United States, and in the southeastern U.S. for that matter, have evolved with fire as part of what they are. And there are these adaptations for these normal pulses of fire when you come through. Well, in the absence of just allowing fires to burn during the worst times, we can take times in which the weather is more amenable. That's not going to have this fire. It's going to blow up the universe. And so we set fires at that time, and it's trying to mimic back that natural fire, which has kept healthy ecosystems for eons across North America.
Now, Chris, can you talk to us, though, a little bit about how others who don't live in the immediate area or the areas immediately surrounding the areas of wildfire, how those folks are affected by wildfire? Why should they care?
Well, certainly the smoke is that it doesn't. It's not polite. It tends to go away from where the actual fire is burning. And so we saw scenes like downtown San Francisco. It literally looked like Mars. It was orange. And even in where I live, I was well over 100 miles from the nearest fire. And at one point, I couldn't even see my neighbor's house across the street. It was so smoky. And you can just imagine, a normal, healthy person, how that would be impacted, the smoke. But it was just an absolute crisis in terms of public health, not only in California, but again, it was moving all across. I had relatives in Arkansas. They were thanking me for the beautiful sunset that California was providing because the smoke had gotten over that far. So we've got that going through just the public health that's happening, and you should care. And for these other areas that might not historically have burned large, whether it might be Florida or Texas or Maine, get ready. I'm telling you now, the fires are coming because climate's changing. We're finding areas that never burned are all of a sudden starting to burn with enormous intensity, and it's surprising a lot of people all over the world that are first starting to see these fires now.
And I want to drill down on that because that was part of the name of my episode, Wildfires, Are They Coming for Us All? Because I had heard that. So look, talk a little bit about that. Connect the dots for people in Florida, in Arkansas, in Maine, in terms of them and the anticipation or possibility or probability even that they can experience or will experience wildfires in their futures.
Well, with climate change, it's going to be drying things out where, depending upon where you're at, there's different models saying that there'll be less actual rainfall in certain places. But with increasing heat, there's the plants are going to be taking up more water just to be able to survive. And there's just going to be less soil water. So areas in which that traditionally, we didn't really think about it, all of a sudden now it's like, all the stars are starting to line up and we better get ready. And I've seen this in Russia. I've seen it in Germany. I've seen it in the Pacific Northwest, where it's like, oh, this is the asbestos forest. We don't have to worry about that. And all of a sudden, it's like, uh-oh, the asbestos forest is burning with enormous flames, and those ecosystems aren't necessarily ready for those. And certainly the people aren't ready for it. But I'm telling you right now, I don't want to be the prophet of doom, but the times they be a-changing, and you should expect to be impacted by wildfire, no matter really where you live in the United States.
I have to think, too, perhaps some of the forested areas of North Texas, where we are in the Dallas area, it can get very dry, and we have lots and lots of drought. We just don't have a whole lot of forest areas, but we do have a major forest. I would say that something like that could be at risk in the future, where you have a forest and you have drought.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to just be forest. I look at Texas, they had a 1 million acre fire up there over the last 5 years where it was burning in grasslands.
Right.
So there's an economic impact, to the cattle industry in that area. You're talking about other peoples that might be impacted. So as long as there's fuels, it doesn't matter if it's grass, shrubs, trees, or your house. Fire just looks at it as food, and it's just wanting to eat. So, try to get those landscapes so the fire is going to have less to eat.
Exactly. Last couple of things before we're going to need to close out this segment, but this has just been so very exciting. Now, of course, the fires are causing a lot of loss of our built environment. How do wildfires, very briefly, harm or impact our natural environment, i.e. air quality? We know they affect air quality, but what about water quality, drinking water, and animal life?
All right. Well, for animals, it depends upon the species. Some just absolutely don't like it, but we find that I would say 80% of species actually flock to recently burned areas, because imagine this, like deer would rather eat grass than, sticks. So they'll actually go to those areas. We certainly see water quantity actually increases after a fire. So we've got more water that comes up because the plants aren't there to suck up all that water. But unfortunately, we find, especially in the first year, the water quality goes down significantly, and lots of debris, sediment that comes down. And that can impair not only the natural environment and the critters that are trying to live in that, but also for our drinking water, where you could be impacted by, in California, a fire up in the mountains that could potentially fill in a reservoir, which might shut down the drinking water 100 miles away over in San Francisco.
Last thing, Chris, and we will go ahead and close out our segment here, and that is, what can ordinary people do in their everyday lives to help drive solutions to the wildfires and its growing effect and devastation on our everyday lives?
Well, especially for those people that live in fire-prone areas, is not to rely on the cavalry to come and rescue you. You've got to be in partnership with the fire service. And if you call 911, you should not expect that there's going to be a fire truck show up, because these fires are just so large and so fast-moving. So it's a shared relationship where we have to take responsibility to make our homes more likely to survive a wildfire, and not just wait on the fire service to come out there and spray the wet stuff on the red stuff.
Hey, well, thank you so much. We have been with Dr. Chris Dicus, and we'll be back on the other side of the break with part 2 of our show on extreme weather events. Wildfires, are they coming for all of us? And our guest on the other side is joining us all the way from Australia, and he has a lot of expertise, being from one of the most fire-prone areas in the world, so he can really help us understand this issue. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. We are back with part 2 of today's show on extreme weather events, wildfires, and part 2 is about the view from the other wildfire-prone part of the world, that is Australia. And we have to wonder, are all these wildfires coming for all of us everywhere? Now, while Africa is probably the most fire-prone place in the world, Australia is right behind. And therefore, it's very instrumental in researching and helping us to understand the impacts of wildfires. In fact, Eastern Australia is one of the most fire-prone regions in the world, and its predominant eucalyptus forests have evolved to thrive on the phenomenon of bushfire. Historically, Their 1939 Black Friday bushfire in Australia's Victoria state, burning some 4.9 million acres, was the largest wildfire in modern history. But that may have been surpassed now. We'll let our guests tell us. And nearly 3 billion animals were killed or displaced by Australia's devastating wildfires in 2019 and 2020, according to a new report, with experts calling it one of the worst wildfire disasters, again, in modern history. So needless to say, the Australians have a lot they can share with the rest of the world for this increasingly severe and widespread phenomena of wildfires. And here today to help us unpack this and understand this some more is Dr. David Bowman. David is an adjunct professor at the Research Institute for the Environment and Livelihoods at Charles Darwin University in Casuarina, Northern Territory, Australia, and he's a visiting fellow at the Fenner School of Environment at the Australian National University. He has a PhD in forest ecology and silviculture, and he was a wildlife biologist with the Northern Territory Arks and Wildlife Commission. David was awarded a Charles Bullard Fellowship at Harvard University, where he wrote an influential book on the environmental controls of Australian rainforest distribution. David was also director of the Australian Research Council Key Center for Tropical Wildlife Management, and he was a research chair at the University of Tasmania, where he built critical mass in pyrogeographic and environmental change biology research. Welcome, David, and did I get all of that right?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm now based at the University of Tasmania, and my official title now is the Professor of Pyrogeography and Fire Science at the University of Tasmania. I've created a new discipline, I suppose, for myself, because all of the things that I've been doing over 40 years of research didn't really have a neat academic pigeonhole. So I now bill myself as a pyrogeographer, and you might wonder what that is. And a pyrogeographer is somebody who thinks about fire in all possible ways, in all scales of time and space. So I'm as interested in fire at the very beginning of life on Earth, and I'm interested in the future of fire, and I'm interested in very small fires. I'm interested in global impacts of fires. I'm pretty well interested in all facets of fire.
Amazing. With regards to something you just mentioned, with the pyrogeographics, is there a difference in the fires way back when and now?
There's lots of differences. You know, there's actually a period in Earth history where wet vegetation burnt, and that's because the oxygen concentrations in the atmosphere were so much higher. So we've had fire activity on Earth has varied due to climate change, due to oxygen levels. And then really the big innovation that happened about 1 million years ago, we're not exactly certain when, but certainly in 1 million years, and then particularly the last couple of 100,000 years, a really interesting evolutionary moment occurred where an intelligent creature learned how to use fire. And that intelligent creature, that ancestor of that intelligent creature, or our ancestors, that's us.
Right.
And I think that once humans, or what we call hominins, the early humans, figured out that they could take fire from the environment, they became, in a sense, masters of their own universe. And the mess we're in now is really because of our fire addiction. We are fully paid up fire animals. We don't often realise it. We drive around in little metal boxes with a fire in the front, and you think, no, that's ridiculous. There's no fire unless you've got an electric vehicle. There's no fire in the vehicle I'm driving, and you go, hang on. It's called the internal combustion engine. So we're very interesting creatures because we actually have a codependency on fire, and that codependency developed, we think, around 1 million years ago, when modern humans, which are the last 200,000 years, migrated out of Africa. One of the things that they exported was fire technology. So that technology of being able to manage and burn country, and then, of course, Australia is very prominent in thinking about what we would call, maybe prejudicially, we would call prehistoric, but we would call low technology cultures like the Aboriginal people. I've been privileged to work with Aboriginal people in Northern Australia. I've close relationships with Aboriginal communities, and the reason those relationships developed is because of my interest in learning about how they used fire. And I'm 100% certain that the things I've observed and seen, their traditions of making fire and managing fire stretch back 30, 50, maybe 100,000 years. That there's an extraordinary thing to see somebody make fire with sticks and to know it's not like Boy Scouts playing. That is an ancient practice that was developed somewhere, probably in Africa, and been carried and transmitted really all around the world.
Amazing. And I can see why we are so codependent with fire. I think about it as you explain it. Fire is power. That gave humanoids power and still does to a great degree. So it looks like it's going to be hard to wane our codependence. It's also something that I see that people don't, even though they're riding around on it and experience it all day, every day, they don't think about it. I had the opportunity to explain just some very rudimentary principles about air pollution over the holidays and mention to them anything that combusts, burns, is creating air pollution. It's like, you could see this great big light go off. But David, let me ask you, though, about wildfire, or I guess you might call it bushfire season in Australia. We were talking earlier before going on the air about the differences in seasons in general, Christmas. So when is wildfire or bushfire season there in Australia, and why is it so different than our American Northwest fire season?
Right. Well, so it's basically a little bit of, basic geography. The planet we're on has an axis, and that axis gives us seasons. And so as the Earth moves around the sun, we get our annual seasons. And when you're winter, we get our summer, and when we get our winter, you get your summer. So there's this interchange between the hemispheres. But Australia is a big place, and during the winter, during your summer, our winter, the northern part of Australia will be burning. And so in our own continent, we have fires which are in the north, and then those fires move down into the hotter time of year, which is, beginning now in our summer, December, January, February, and then they track back. But the really intense big fires, the fires that get the international news, not the fires that are occurring in the outback, they are often fought by aircraft. And what we have been doing historically is we've entered into leasing agreements where in your off-season we might get firefighting aircraft to bring them down to Australia because they're no use because there's winter up there, and vice versa. They go backwards and forwards. Well, guess what? That's ending.
Yes.
Why?
Why?
You want to know why? It's ending because the fire seasons are blurring.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to touch upon the fire seasons. And when we come back after the break, I want to talk about that just a little bit more before we move on to something else in terms of the impacts of climate change and where we're going to be going with these various fire seasons. So we will be right back on the other side of the break to talk with Dr. David Bowman from Australia, so that he can make us much smarter about wildfires and bushfires with all of their experience. We'll be right back. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting awareness through expo, conferences, film festival, interactive experiences, and now EarthX streaming TV. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority, or the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Our new sponsors, North Haven Gardens, serving the DFW Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, classes, and more. And we're told the best Christmas trees in Texas. Check them out at nhg.com. And our final sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. Back to our show on extreme weather events. Wildfires, are they coming for all of us? And we are back with Dr. David Bowman, joining us from Australia, where he is a pyrogeographic specialist. Thank you again so much, David, for taking your time to join us today. Now, we were talking about the seasons, and you were explaining to us how at one point that was some benefit until the seasons in the two different parts of the world begin to merge, that being California, where our last guest was from, and Australia, which seemed to be among the top fire spots in our world. So how is climate change changing that, and what is expected in the future as it relates to the fire seasons, I suppose, for both these locations?
Yeah, so, what does the future hold? Everybody wants to know what the future is. Well, a better way of looking at it is let's just look at what the recent past has told us. If you look at the recent past, we could see worldwide that fire seasons are lengthening and the number of extreme days which you will get extreme fire weather is increasing. And you don't need to be a genius to understand that that's connected to rising temperatures and, to a certain degree, not so much, but lessening rainfall. One of the problems with rising temperatures is that the atmosphere is like a sponge, and as you increase the temperature of the atmosphere, the sponge doesn't increase in step. It increases in what we would say, an exponential way. So it's for every degree of increase, you're getting something like, 5 or 10 times more capacity to absorb moisture. So we're seeing basically fuel and landscapes becoming drier. I'm experiencing this right here in Tasmania, where the landscape, even though we do get rain, the landscape is just thirsty, it's just really thirsty. And so what we know is that this drying and heating is leading to more severe fires. The great fires that occurred last summer were simply a product of, it's not, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes. I kept telling the media this is a weather and climate-driven event. It's very simple. There are lots of other complexities, I agree, but the fact is the landscape was like a desiccated coconut. It was just stupidly dry. When you get a stupidly dry landscape, you get gigantic fires.
We categorize wildfires under our extreme weather events. However, I'm learning that probably the ordinary person in their everyday lives do not tend to categorize wildfires as weather events.
Yeah, that's right. And so, unless we get a grip on global heating, we've got a bad problem. Modern societies don't live with fire well. Indigenous people were doing it much better, but we've settled in flammable environments. We've built extraordinarily complicated infrastructure. We have a history of disasters, and now climate change is turbocharging the problem. That's really the simple answer.
There's a good or positive part or aspects associated with wildfires. Could you very briefly explain that to our listeners?
Well, that's right. I said before the yin and the yang of fire. So life on Earth has been interacting with fire for many hundreds of millions of years, and the plants and animals that live in places that are likely to burn because of lightning and drought have developed a whole lot of methods, strategies, physiologies, anatomies, behaviours, traits, call them whatever you want, where they can actually harmoniously coexist with fire. And in fact, some plants and animals have gone the next step, where they've really made their life history built around fire. And paradoxically, if you take fire away artificially by fire suppression, which is, the Smokey Bear paradigm, then you can actually cause ecological harms. And that's called you're changing the fire regime. And the absence of fire or the changed fire regime can disadvantage plants and animals because they don't have the necessary cues for their life history and their life cycle.
And our guest on the first part of our show did talk a little bit about that, too, in terms of how it was necessary to have the control fires in order to, I guess, kind of clean out the underbrush that could cause more fires. But let me ask you this from your experience with the Australian wildfires and bushfires. How have those fires impacted climate change? We know that climate change impacts and has caused the wildfires, the bushfires, and caused it to be drier. How are the fires impacting the climate and the rest of the environment?
Okay, I'll tell you something. The fires that occurred on the east coast of Australia were so intense that their behaviour is best characterised as a medium-sized volcanic eruption.
Oh, my.
The fires ejected smoke particles into the stratosphere of such enormous quantities that a giant bubble of smoke orbited the planet. If you don't believe me, you can check this in Nature, which is the top scientific journal. It's been documented. Those fires were crazy, crazy, crazy fires. They made Australia a greenhouse gas emitter. I think the top five, one of the top five, I think only US, China, Saudi Arabia, and a few other, maybe Germany and Canada. There are only a few other industrial nations that could exceed the amount of CO2 that we emitted from those fires. Bottom line, those fires were extreme, strange, and hugely impactful on the Earth system. It's not just what they were doing to the local Australian environment. These guys were actually, they transmitted soot to South America. They set smoke alarms off in Auckland, New Zealand. They changed the colour of the glaciers in New Zealand. These fires were not normal fires.
Yeah.
That's just the fact.
And that's one of the things we want to make sure that we get over to our listeners, is that just because you don't live right there in the immediate area or even the area immediately surrounding the fires, we're all still being impacted one way or the other. Everybody has to care. Also, David, I want to talk with you a little bit, I guess, about your expectations about the relationship between our environment, our people, and fire. What do you think that'll look like in coming years?
So the big question is, how are we going to live with fire and flammable landscapes now that landscapes and climate are making fire more common? And it's really a very simple answer. We adapt, or we're going to be like the Mayans. they'll go, archaeologists in the future will go, this civilization tried to live in this environment. They couldn't adapt. Guess what? They went broke. They left. Or they ended up living in grass houses, It's that simple.
Yeah. Are you seeing any movement towards that, like, for example, building codes dealing with flammability or lack thereof, or fire retardant materials, anything? Are you seeing anything moving in that direction?
Absolutely, but the problem is that we're racing an out-of-control locomotive, and it's going to really be like a Superman moment if we can get ahead of this thing and adapt our communities and change our way of life, or this locomotive is just going to go straight through us. And, it's probably one of the most exciting times to be a fire scientist, because we're seeing, crazy stuff playing out pretty well every year now, and it's a race against time. I'm optimistic, but I'm also a bit pessimistic, because I think we humans only will really, kick into action once things start getting really ugly. And, the bad news is that what we're seeing at the moment is not really ugly. The capacity for major, unbelievable, jaw-dropping disasters has not been realised yet.
I think we can realize it's right around the corner. One last thing, and we have 30 seconds, and that is what keeps you up at night.
Knowing is the whole city of Hobart, where I live, could be incinerated in a fire, which would be like in a nuclear explosion, and thousands of people are going to die, and pretty well everything that I know and like will be incinerated. That's kind of a stressful thing to know about.
Well, here's hoping some changes can be made before that happens. We've been with Dr. David Bowman, joining us from Australia, and we really appreciate your expertise and your help in being able to explain this to us so that our listeners understand. Our goal is to create environmental empathy so people realize that it's not an option to care about this stuff. That even though the fire, the wildfire, the bushfire is not in our backyards, it affects us all. So we thank you so much, David, for joining us and helping us to understand that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Have a nice day.
Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. Each of these tiny acts seem insignificant, but all of them add up, one way or the other, to the change that we each live through. This is Bernice Butler, your host. Thank you today for listening. Join us again next week.